I think about what am I going to celebrate? I'm going to celebrate the connections that I have with you, with the people around me that matter, kind of with, when I go outside in nature and getting on my bike and climbing up a hill and just feeling like I'm on the edge, but getting there. Like those to me are the things about celebrating life.
What if aging wasn't something to fear, but rather a journey to celebrate? Hey there, Health Feast listeners. Dr. Rock here. And on today's episode, Poe and I sit down with Scott Fulton. Scott is a longevity expert. He's an Ironman triathlete, something he started in his late 40s, and an author with a mission to transform the way we think about aging. Scott really challenges the cultural fear that we have as a society around growing older, and he offers a perspective that values life's later stages as not as a challenge, but as an opportunity for growth and connection. Scott teaches at the University of Virginia and the University of Delaware, and he leads his own business, Home Ideations, which focuses on helping people age with dignity and vitality. In his book, Wealthspan, Scott explores how we can extend both our health and our wealth span by making informed, intentional choices throughout our lives. Well, in today's episode, Scott really challenges this anti-aging narrative that is pervasive in our society, and he suggests that instead of fearing decline, we should aim to lengthen and enrich the quote-unquote party of life. And we also discuss how societal factors like housing and community impact our ability to age well, and why curiosity and connection are essential ingredients for longevity. Scott shares insights from his own life, including his experiences as a multiple Ironman triathlete, something that he began in his late 40s, and how physical and mental and social investments really create a fulfilling, active, and connected aging experience. Well, this conversation is packed with insights into the science of longevity, the importance of community, the value of purpose as we age. If you've ever thought about how to live well in every phase of life, this episode is for you. So, whether you're on a walk, maybe savoring a quiet moment with your morning coffee, or winding down your day with some gentle stretching, this episode is the perfect companion to rethink and embrace the journey of aging. So let's do the show. So Scott, it's wonderful to have you here. I was telling Poe before you came on that I actually haven't met you before. This is also our first time meeting. I met you kind of virtually and through LinkedIn, and reached out to you after I saw some of the posts you had been writing, and then that you had written a book that seemed really fascinating. And I thought it'd be a lot of fun to have you on. So thank you for coming on today. It's really great to have you here on the Health Feast.
Well, thanks for reaching out, and it's great to spend some time with you guys. And actually, I kind of like it when we just kind of go freestyle, so it's not too scripted. And as a listener, I like to listen to authentic conversations, so I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah,
awesome. I think that you're in the right place, man.
That's exactly what we like to have. Okay, so I'll start the conversation then just by saying one thing that sticks out to me, Scott, about your message. Well, first of all, about kind of our society is that there is a very much an anti-aging slant. There's a whole industry around it that thrives on fear. We have fear of wrinkles. I'm 44 now, and I don't know how many times now I get targeted ads for like skincare and hair color. But there's a fear of decline. There's a fear of death, and it's powerful and profitable. And it suggests that we should fight aging at every turn. And one quote that really stuck out from your book was in Wealthspan, you write, "Aging is not a disease to be cured, but a natural process to be understood, respected, and even celebrated."
Did I write that?
That's a powerful statement, Scott. That's a powerful statement. I want you to start there. Talk about how we embrace aging rather than fight it in this society that equates youth with value.
Yeah, and I think I'll kind of just intro it with that's part of what I love about the writing process is you just kind of let go, and sometimes the flow just kind of takes you somewhere. I think it's if we think about trying to fight nature, right? It's like fighting aging is like fighting nature. Good luck with that. I was listening to recently an interview with George Carlin. He was way before his time, and I found him a little edgy, but one of the comments that I remember him talking about in the interview was when he came to figure out that really none of us really matter in the grand scheme of it. And then it kind of plays forward into the fears about global warming and things, which are all legitimate. But if you kind of step way back and say, we don't matter. The planet and the earth and nature is far bigger than we would ever like to imagine. And it corrects everything given enough time. It's just a question of whether we want to be around or turns our ancestors to be around to enjoy that celebration. And so if you kind of take that view of we're not that big, we're not that important, we don't have that much control, why are we trying to fight this thing that everyone knows we can't win? And so aging is a natural process. None of us like, me included, I don't like the idea of the end of life coming and this party being over, but I sure like the idea of how can I lengthen this party of what I call life, or these moments that we have, like this moment here, getting to meet you two, getting to start a conversation that I don't know where it's going to go. We'll have potentially a few moments in there that will just kind of stay with me. And that's what life is about. And so if I think about what am I going to celebrate, I'm going to celebrate the connections that I have with you, with the people around me that matter, kind of with, when I go outside in nature and getting on my bike and climbing up a hill and just, feeling like I'm on the edge, but getting there. Like those to me are the things about celebrating life. What we celebrate may change over the years, and that's fine. I'm not going to be climbing mountains on my bike when I'm 95. Maybe I am. I don't think so. And I'm not going to judge success at 95 because of what I did, at this age. And it's partly, I think, if I go back to when I started to get really interested in aging, was I started to look at what was happening with pro athletes at retirement, because they go through all the same things that the rest of us do way earlier in life, right? They've kind of, they've exited their career, their fame, their praise, doors open for them. And then suddenly it goes quiet. It's kind of like what people, particularly men, I think, struggle with at the end of a career is, well, what now? I'm not getting the kind of praise and support and reinforcement. So I've got to go find out what that is. And sometimes, you're afraid to knock on the door because someone may not answer, and the door may open and say, yeah, that's not the door I was looking for. So you can view it as, however you want, but ultimately, I'd like to extend the party. And I know that attitude, in terms of positive attitude, we know from lots and lots of studies, that's going to impact your health outcomes too. So it all kind of, the good favors the good. The bad, unfortunately, will compound in the opposite direction. So that's kind of, I guess, in a nutshell, my view of aging. I don't like getting slower. I don't celebrate getting slower, but I celebrate that I can still get out and do it and have just as much fun and feel like I'm working exactly the same as I did 10 years ago, for example, running. It's my wife and I have this conversation all the time. Like, I feel like I'm running as fast as I did 10 years ago, but the watch doesn't lie. Right? But that's not the point, right? It still feels the same. And that's really what matters. And so 10 years forward, I'm not going to like it that I'm slower again. But if I'm still out there doing it and feeling that same experience, like that's the high, right?
That's interesting. It's the effort that you're putting in is the same, but maybe the external, what people view externally as like the results aren't necessarily, the times might slow down, but you're still getting all those internal benefits, all the, positive hormones that you release from putting in that effort, all the elevation in mood, anything that you're getting, it just looks different. It just looks different externally.
Yeah. So it literally feels exactly the same. it feels exactly the same. The only, for me, like, I don't know what the external world is viewing me, or particularly care. The only thing is my watch tells me. If I didn't have my watch, I would sit here and tell you, I haven't slowed down at all. I still, if I went by all of the other, relative perceived effort versus that sense of motion that we have, balance, just moving, doing regular things, I don't feel any different. And I think that's why people, we hear them say right when they get older, I still feel as young as ever.
Right.
Because they're doing many of the same things and it still has the same kind of feedback to them. It's more a question of, well, what are you doing? That starts to matter more as we get older. But so yeah, it's I think it's a celebration. It's one of the things that, with the anti-aging movement or this fear of aging, if we go back a few generations to when aging, was celebrated and you were respected, right? You were the wise one in the community. It's I kind of caution people, just because you're older doesn't make you wise anymore. And so if you want to be the wise one, there's some work involved in continuing to learn and educate and remain humble.
So I just wanted to share with you, Scott. So recently I went back. I'm Pacific Islander. I'm Samoan. And I got an opportunity to go back and visit sort of where my grandparents were from. And after listening to you, it's like, I wonder if it's like a westernized idea of this sort of anti-aging, because my experience being in a village that's been that way for like thousands of years is that the elderly, nobody really cares about, like, I gotta look young. You know what I'm saying? Like, most people are like, one of my relatives was saying, we're the ones that are just stewards of the land. We just take care of the land. We're just here to spend our time on the land, and we take care of the land. There was not this sort of like, oh, I got to keep up with the Joneses. I got to look young. It's just like not there, and there's sort of like this like oneness with the area around where they live. Like, they're out in the sun, they're working in the plantations, and so it's like, having that experience and then listening to you talk about how this sort of there is no anti-aging movement in this little village in the Pacific Island. It's like they're literally one with their surroundings. They've sort of like, and I was talking to The Rock before our podcast, and I was like, there's like this embracing of what is, versus like, oh, I'm trying to, defy death and I want to look younger. And I think it's a westernized idea that we're sort of bombarded with, that we have to, like, you're talking about all the media, like all the advertisements about take this pill and you'll last better in bed, like all these like things that are like and then when I went back, I just thought, like, wow, what, we kind of live in this bubble where we're kind of bombarded by all these ideas of like how we're supposed to look and how we're supposed to, like, whereas like when you're in a village that's been like that for thousands of years and they're the same things that they've been doing for a long time. It's just like, you just kind of like, what am I prioritizing here? Right. Some people prioritize health. What do? We go up, we run, we do, and it's like, for what? You know what I mean? Like, you're not going to defy death. We all have an end date. You know what I mean? So, I mean, what do you think about that? Is it like a westernized ideology that we all are kind of bought into?
Well, I think you hit on a key point there, is that they've been doing what they've been doing for thousands of years. And so and I'll kind of just preface that by, when people ask me kind of, well, what have I done over my career? And I say, it's too many different things to try to tell you unless, you have the afternoon free. But I said, if there's one thing, I've been leading change, leading people through change, leading groups of people through change in all sorts of situations. And if we look at Western society, it's new. Right? We are brand new. We are trying all sorts of things. We're allowing all sorts of things to happen around us and not understanding the consequences of them. So if I say, like, the industrialization of food, for example, and take that, like, that's a new thing. Like, I kind of joke that it's called conventional if it has pesticides on it, as though that's been the standard for thousands of years, right? And so I think part of what we like, there's a little bit of I'll say North America, we're teenagers in the grand scheme of it, right? In terms of we're new to the party, we're rebels, we're trying stuff, and and some of it's working out, and maybe some of it we're finding out was just more of a short-term thing, and now we're seeing some of the flip side of that may have been good in the short term. So I work in housing space too, right? So you could look at that one example and say we came up with the subdivisions. That was a huge thing in the West. Not so popular in Europe. It's been around a lot longer at the game and realized there's a price to be paid for trying to distribute and then try to allow people to move. And so now as we look at the aging experience and the aging challenges, the subdivision is one of the last places you want to be in terms of if that's your plan in later years, because even though you think you're in a community, you're not in enough community and you easily get isolated, and it's too far to get to the grocery store. Like you talk about the village community, right? They're able to walk to those places. It's not that they wouldn't drive or, they couldn't, right? Everything is by design within that range. And so we haven't figured out, we kind of let the urban centers go downhill, right? And we didn't maintain those. They became undesirable. So I think there's just a lot of things we've been playing with and trying out, and we're starting to realize that some of them were good and some of them we probably need to go back and rewrite the story.
That reminds me of I'm Indian, and I feel like from a young age taught that when your parents get older, they'll move in with their kids, right? Or there's a responsibility to take care of your parents. That I was raised to with that value. And then having worked in healthcare for the last 20 years, it's so not the value of so many people in this country. Not by malice most of the time. It's really by what you're saying. We have these systems now set up where it's not even possible for people to have their parents come live with them, for so many different reasons. Society has strayed so far off from supporting that value, is what it feels like.
Yeah, if you look at kind of what came out of post-World War II, right, there were two really big things so one was the car, not that the car was new, but in terms of the car ownership, just skyrocketed. And we started to build a lot more roads and freeways. Those big infrastructure projects were great for the economy. They were as much of the economy then as what healthcare is today. And so it was really good for generating jobs. I grew up in a town that had 3 General Motors auto plants. So I kind of saw the impact of what, just followed that over many years to see how that played out over time. And so all of those things are relatively short term. You can't keep building until like they say, the whole US is one big subdivision, right? That's everyone understands that's not going to work. So at what point is enough, and you've got to start to go back and revisit it. And so yeah, it's and so your definition of making it was you had your own house, right? That was, you were independent. That was, what people thought independence was about, that you'd made it. And everybody I get why they like it, but, and then you get this societal, views around, again, we've made it because we can have our own house, and we'll say, Asian communities and things where there's 3 generations living under one roof because they can't afford it. Except that you realize how much money they end up making because of what they save by not all operating their own homes. And you kind of say, well, how can they afford that? They got 3 Mercedes in the driveway or something, that sort of thing, right? It's kind of like, well, there's a little bit more to economics than just owning a home. So yeah, it's again, like the teenager, I want to get an identity. And so I think in the West, we've been rightfully and understandably driven to find our identity. And we're starting to grow up now and realize there's a little bit more to it than some of the things that we valued for the last 50 or 60 years.
Well, I was going to ask too, if you could talk a little bit more about like what inspired you to even start writing about this, like, was there like an aha moment where you're like, I think we should start talking about this? Cause I'm really curious to me, like some of the ideas that you have are really like interesting, when it comes to like how your career helps influences your health, and, I mean, coming from a law enforcement background, it's like a stressful situation. It's a very stressful job. I was telling Rock, I got injured on the job, still dealing with that. So it's like, so I feel there's a lot of people that are also maybe not in the same field as I am, but that have stresses. And how did you put all of it together to where, you came up with like this sort of health span idea?
It probably goes back to like I think most of us who work in this, particularly in aging, we look back at some elders who had strong influences on us as youth. And so for me, that was my grandmother. And I write about her in the book a little bit, with her 1967 cherry red Chevy Impala, 2-door soft top, 327. Not the car you'd think that your widowed grandmother would be pulling up in the driveway for. And it was like, I can remember the day. It's just always stood out. I was pretty young to even get it. I was watching all the reaction of, my siblings and kind of like, oh man, that is so cool. And I, eventually as we spent time together, I got to appreciate it. But it's, but I think more broadly was I had because of my father's success, I had a lot of encounters with CEOs and kind of people in high level in really successful businesses who had really mixed outcomes in their aging experience. And so I took from that there's more to this than just money. To kind of get is this Western view of it's all socioeconomics, and that's a very Western view. We look around the world around health and longevity, money doesn't really factor in, right? So this is what the U.S. is famous for, is just looking, the navel gazing at our own situation. And yeah, we understand why that is a U.S. issue, but kind of putting that aside, it was curious to me that there was something else going on than just money. And so it kind of stayed with me really over the decades. And then I found myself in and out of corporate over the years. And I was like, okay, I can't do this anymore. I was selling or licensing deals for China, Russia, and Japan, Korea, like countries that, all interesting, but building more chemical plants was not what I felt like I was put on this earth for. And so I started to question where could I provide value, and the aging space. Like I knew about the baby boom when I was in my 20s. I remember saying to a financial guy, I wonder if I should be investing in nursing homes. So that's in my 20s, right? So it just had stayed with me to know kind of what was coming. And that's what data tells us, right? It tells us that the trends usually long before they arrive. And so I just said, okay, I'm going to dig into this more. So I started to do a lot of research into it and realized I think I've got some idea of some things going on. And so I started to dig into it enough. And I said, I think there's something here that I can do as a business that feels like I'm contributing something to society that's meaningful. Certainly didn't pretend, and I still don't pretend to have a lot of answers. But even when I teach, I try to encourage my students that if I have one goal for you, it's just ask better questions. You'll figure, you're smart, you'll figure out the answer. But if you're not asking the right question, the likelihood of finding the answer is going to be a lot longer down the road. So I think that was really what, I saw aging could be really cool. As a kid, it had its challenges. And so as a researcher who's used to tackling, big issues, I worked on global projects. I tend to think in large scale. And so how could I do something that was going to scale, that really impacted a lot of people? And then I think a lot of it too was, as I started to do this work, I found a lot of doctors were more than willing to come and help me when they found out that I was starting to teach about this, because it's just not something that, certainly every lifestyle doctor will tell you, if there's anything I can do to help you with education and get the word out, just let me know, right? Because that's the big gap, is people just don't know. So again, they haven't been helped to ask better questions. And so there's a common theme there. And so I found myself in a community of, my background isn't medicine, but I was invited into medicine surprisingly quickly. And it's been a great supportive community that we're all in it for the same reason. So that's kind of my story of how I found my way into it. And I think it's always good to have perspective from multiple different vantage points. And I think, again, if you're looking at lifestyle, there is no one answer to everything. It's a complicated balancing act to try to get it right.
Scott, talk about Wealthspan in particular. So the name of your book is Wealthspan, and for our listeners, I have a link down there, and the spelling, which is wealth with H, WHEALTH, span. So it's a combination of health span and wealth, right? And so it's such a fascinating and I think useful concept, like so useful. And I want to know, like, where did the genesis of that come from? And if you can talk our listeners a little bit through it.
Yeah, so it plays nicely into our conversation around Western values, right? So what do people focus on in the West? Well, wealth is really important, or perceived wealth, right? We put a lot of effort into that. So there's an element of, okay, if you're focusing on wealth, how can I look at health span from a wealth standpoint? And so that's part of it. And so I kind of look at it as wealth in terms of financial impact of our choices over a lifespan, health in terms of current health and health span, and then lifespan, which would be how many years in total do we end up living. Longevity is kind of one of these nebulous terms that's thrown around, but nobody really knows what it means. So it's a way to kind of break it down into discrete elements that you can talk to separately. So the wealth piece, I don't spend a lot of time on like what a financial advisor would do, because I think that piece is carved out. I focus more on what does your financial advisor not do? And so what they don't typically do is focus on your health and your housing. And if I look at essentially beyond the age of 65, what are the two things that are going to impact your wealth, your net equity, more than anything else? The market might drop, and in 2 years it'll have recovered. Maybe it'll do it a couple of times during that period of life. But that's market volatility, and over the last 100 years, it always recovers. The problem is more on the health and housing, and those two typically go together. And so I kind of talk about it from if you want to preserve your wealth, whatever it is, if you have $100,000, if you have $1 million, if you have $100 million, it probably doesn't matter. Because you can spend whatever you want, and it's still not. Right. It's still going to be the noise, but that isn't 99 point whatever percent of us. So whatever wealth we have, generally we want to preserve it. And again, if I kind of coach around, think of it from a wealth standpoint around trying to minimize your taxes. Right? There's a common goal of, well, I'd like to minimize my taxes that I'm paying. I want to pay my fair share, but I'm not looking to pay extra. So I kind of say, well, now let's talk about healthcare. Yeah, I want a healthcare and I want to be able to pay for healthcare. Well, would you like to pay twice? If just because, like, you want to be generous to the healthcare system? If I'm going to pay extra, I'd actually rather pay it in taxes because I know it's going to be distributed out, but that's another discussion. So if you look at what happens with housing, and I'll kind of talk about it in the book too, in terms of the falling off the financial cliff. So in my work, in terms of, I see all the stories that come in every week from families and people that in my network who are trying to help them. We call it falling off the financial cliff, and this is typically, if we I'll just for simplicity, I'll say it's a couple. One, and here's the common example in terms of universally within the U.S. is in a couple, The man is typically 2 or 3 years older than the woman. The man has a shorter lifespan. He has a shorter health span, so he gets into health complications. And so we'll say he has a heart attack, myocardial infarction. That triggers an event. Okay, all hands on deck, or maybe it's early dementia diagnosis, right? So the point is that all the focus goes to that individual and trying to do whatever's possible to either certainly address it. Is it possible to reverse it? How do you slow it down? All these things. So what happens with the housing? Well, can they stay in the house that they're in, or maybe they need more care? And if they need significant care that their partner can't take care of, often what can happen is they need to be moved into some sort of a care facility. And so the wife in this example is at home saying, hang on, I'm 7 years old. I'm planning to live here for another 20 years. I'm not ready to go do that. And so now and they think they have lots of money, and they do by all measures, except that now we have one at home and one in a care facility and all the care costs that go with it. And suddenly the money starts to pour out, but that's not where the focus is. The focus is on helping the person who needs care. A couple of years go by, and then you start to realize the outflow of money starts to be significant, but how do you stop it? Are you going to turn the tap off on the care? That's not going to play very well. And so what happens then is that the surviving spouse ends up with far less money than was expected. And now suddenly, may have another 25 years of life, but nowhere near the quality of living or the standard of living that they had both naively expected. So it's just kind of what happens when health starts to kick in and when the housing cost or the housing plan wasn't set out. So on the housing piece, it's really a question of how durable is my current home situation? And I mean that in a really tough, objective way is could you do nothing and live here comfortably until your age 100? So just, get knee surgery, go around on crutches for a couple of days, not be able to go up and down stairs. Just test it out with some things that happen normally, but don't forget about it. Realize that, okay, we better have some plan. And that plan could be a financial plan. I need shared housing. Kind of going back to, again, what we talked about, right? There's a lot of things happening with shared housing now. Kind of the Golden Girls made it popular. There's people now building communities or small little communities that are really designed for shared housing, where there's this culture of people coming together and sharing the costs and providing social, emotional, and financial support.
The subdivision 2.0.
It's really taking, so where you do those little communities matters, right? So doing it out in the middle where the land is cheap might sound economically appealing, but long term, that's not the solution. So I really look at what can you do inside of communities today to say, if you could take one block of a community and instead of just gentrifying it, making it more expensive, maybe you can change the use. There's zoning and changes sometimes required, but it's really rethinking around what's the long range plan here that really works out better for everybody.
Now, do you think that our culture embraces that idea, or do you think a lot of people were so caught up in like the being young or the denial of the fact that we all have that coming? Do you think, and I don't know if it's like, because I'm, in my 40s, I know that's coming, but I'm wondering if like even, 50s, 60s, 70s, some even 80s that are like, maybe by the time you're in your 80s, I think, like, okay, I gotta have something happen. But I'm saying like, is there like a sort of like this denial of like, people don't really want to face the fact that is something that's going to happen, like, I don't know, what have you found in your industry? Like,
there's denial's huge, right? It's part of our protective mechanisms, right? So we evolved to think in the short term. So the fact that people don't plan very well for long term, other than the ones who are investment minded, they make it connect. Okay, if I do this, because someone says if you do this much every paycheck, by the time you're 65 and 70, you will have that. So people generally, who get it, not everyone gets it, right? A lot of people don't do that, but the ones that do at least get it. We don't articulate that very well to people because we don't tell them, if you go for, if you spend 40 minutes a day walking and you do 20 minutes of resistance exercise and you eat a certain way, you will be able to do this, this, and this when you're 75 and 80. We've never articulated that well to people, right? We tend to hear, and my parents were certainly guilty of this. I heard all the ailments, all the conversations were all the ailments of all their friends. And I don't think that's uncommon. And so yeah, I'm not going to talk about that with my friends because that's what my parents talk about. That's clearly not where my head is. So yeah, but I will tell you that I think the pendulum's starting to swing because I get some younger people. Surprisingly, I wrote a story about this recently. I went golfing. Guy's in his 30s, and he asked me, he was a starter. We had a little bit of time, and he was just chatting about things, and he asked me what I was doing. I said, I teach about aging. Oh, that's interesting. He said, so when you say, tell me what that is. Well, I said, well, one of it is like trying to make sure that, he said, yeah, that's interesting. He said, because I'm really concerned about dementia. He's 32. And so I thought, wow, okay. So I talked to him a little bit about that.
Yeah,
and he said,
yeah,
right. So I'm not saying that's the normal, but like that never would have happened before.
Right.
So it is starting to happen because, again, people aren't stupid. They see what's happening around them, and they either choose to put their head in their sand and hope it doesn't happen to me. But virtually everything happens to everybody, or a good portion of it. Just which one happens to you may be which card you pull out of the deck. But right, but life will throw some things at us. So rather than pretend it won't, what can we do to mitigate the impact when it does? Right? It's like saying I'm never going to get a cold. Well, yeah, I'm going to get a cold, so maybe there's some things I can do to mitigate the effects that I have with that cold.
You described like the financial costs as you get older that are unpredictable and maybe need to be incorporated, like the idea of wealth in your lifespan. But then it's the other way you think of like our health is something we need to treat like our finances. So in the way that we look at our finances and we try to invest, and can you talk about some of those principles of how we invest in our health early and how our health is a compounding, something we get returns on, right? I mean, I think that's a very powerful way to think about our health too.
Yeah, and that's the way I try to approach it. So anyone who understands basic investment principles around money, it's the same thing. So I consciously made an effort to try to use as much of the same language. So which you raise up, right? The return on investment. And so if I do, for example, the 150 minutes a week of moderate activity, moderate stress activity in terms of exercise stress, I know that if I do that, that's going to compound year over year over year. Over the short term, we'll say the short term is 5 years, not going to see much difference. And so this is, when you're used to short-term gains, right? Same as investment, right? Over 5 years, you make that small investment. It doesn't matter a whole lot. You're not like, oh, wow, I can retire at 35. No, it doesn't work that way. But it's the old money that now starts to compound. And so I think I started to see it when I turned about 50, because in my 40s, that was my midlife crisis. Instead of buying the convertible, I bought a bike, and that was kind of a real turning point for me. And by the time you're 50, you start to see this separation happening. 55, 60, 65, 70, and I watch this with adults across all ages, and the gap just gets wider and wider between kind of those who have continued to invest in themselves in terms of regular activity, some daily things that they do it because they've found a way to really enjoy it. No one does it because I'm worried that I won't be able to do something at 85. That's not the motivation. That will never last. You cannot sustain that for 50 years, right? You've got to find things that you like doing, that get you moving, that get your brain going, that says, yeah, I enjoy doing this. And it's not just one thing, because now that I do this, I can do this, this, and this. And I'm not afraid to try something else when someone says, oh, would you like to come and try pickleball? Well, I've heard it's really good. So sure, right? But if you've never got off the couch, the idea of playing pickleball is very intimidating. So it's not that you played racket sports your whole life. It's really this notion of just constantly choosing something every day. And so when you get up in the morning, or even before your feet hit the floor, you're actually looking forward to the thing, that one thing that involves movement, because you know it's going to be fun. And it's going to be challenging, maybe. But, the challenge is equally met by when you're done to say, I did it. I wasn't sure. It was hard. And maybe I didn't do it as well as I hoped. And I golfed for many years, and my favorite courses were always the courses that were the hardest. And I typically didn't play that well, but I said, I really like that course. I have a lot of respect for it. I want another shot at it. Give me another crack. So it's I think that's part of the attitude thing, is that I want another shot at. So I want another shot at tomorrow, or another shot at today. And that I think influences your approach to life.
So I know we sort of always hear, especially in today's culture, you always hear about, what's your why when it comes to fitness or goals, right? You talk a little bit about resilient why. And could you kind of elaborate what that means from your perspective?
People get a little hung up on maybe what their why is. They want to take a shortcut to their why or their purpose and be able to kind of wear the badge. This is my why. Your why can be many small things, but again, compounded together, they can be significant, or they could be one thing you do that's kind of your life is built around. I think there's many aspects to it, and I kind of think of it like a spring, right? That it's fluid, it's moving all the time, because nothing is static in life, right? You talk about being in your 40s today, and 10 years from now, you will have different experiences, and you'll look at things a little bit different. And that's just part of, it's always a moving target. And so there's some elasticity. I'm trying to remember the diagram that I had in there that I talked about it, but it was, I always try to do visual learnings wherever I can to kind of give pictures, because I think particularly I'm a visual learner. So that's part of what I try to do. But it's really this notion of always pushing your boundaries. I remember Coach Meg, or Margaret Moore, I remember had a conversation with her about it. I interviewed her, and I remember she said that learning happens on the edge of your comfort zone. That always stayed with me, and I thought that's absolutely right. Because if you're comfortable, it means you may be comfortable in what you know, but it's really, you've got to get outside your comfort zone, and the more you do it, the more you get comfortable with being uncomfortable. You get less anxious about it. And I, having been in and out of research my whole career, I kind of like celebrate aging. I've learned to celebrate failures. Not in the moment.
Yeah, right.
I don't love it in the moment, but it's then you truly realize, you hear everybody say it, right? You learn more from failure than you do from success. And so if you're never outside your comfort zone, it means you're never failing. And then it means you're just not growing at the rate that you could.
Speaking of discomfort, or maybe not discomfort, but you mentioned you took up biking in your 40s. And I understand from reading the book, you have completed several Ironman triathlons. Was that something you started then it is part of your midlife? Did you have much of an athletic background prior to that? Growing up, was that a big part of, or was it something you just came to in your 40s?
That's a really important part of the question. So I'm glad I didn't jump all over you. I had no athletic background as a kid. Zero. Nothing. Nada. No, we didn't have the money. It didn't matter. But so I'll tell you why the bike fit for me was because I was the youngest of 5 kids. Three of my older siblings were boys, so I always had a bike waiting for me. And so, but I never had a new bike until I bought my old bike, or bought a new bike in my 20s, like after I got my first job. First time I had a new bike in my life. So I learned about being a mechanic, about how to fix bikes and keep them working. And that was in the town where I grew up. That was how I got around. Like, we had one car, family of 7. There was no soccer mom in my family. Like, you didn't get shuttled anywhere. You wanted to go, you figured out how to get there.
You got to get there, yeah.
Right. So I knew that I enjoyed being on a bike. It gave me a lot of freedom. I had tremendous independence as a kid. So I'd get on my bike and go wherever on my own or with friends. And I know to be home for dinner. Don't be late for dinner. That's not a good plan. So when I started in my 40s, there was something just kind of triggered again, like the youthful feeling of things I enjoyed doing as a kid suddenly came back to me. I thought, this is fun. This is why I love biking. And so it was by accident that you get around people who bike, and somebody said, "Oh, well, we're going on a bike on Saturday. I'd love to have somebody come with me." Sure, why not? I don't remember how long the bike was, but it was a bike straight west from where we lived, and then to a ferry and then back, and it was probably 40 miles, 50 miles, something like that. And I'd never suffered like that in my life getting back. And I remember, so moments I remember was later that day, just like laying on the couch, just flat out, had the remote and the TV. It was like, just give me fluids. I was so baked, but it didn't scare me from riding, right? So it just gave me a hunger to say, well, they can do it. Why can't I? I should be able to. They're not super athletes. So it was so quite by accident I found this innate ability to adapt to endurance sports. Had no concept that I could do any sport. I was active, playing as a kid, but it just turned out that I had a knack for endurance sports, so that I could maintain fairly high level intensity for long periods of time. I would have never discovered that. And that was really responsible for a lot of my views on aging and discovering kind of what's possible and learning about the aging experience that you do when you're out doing endurance sports.
Did you have to build that up, Scott, over time? Like, I guess your level of cardiovascular fitness, or you're saying that you kind of jumped in and you were like, whoa, I have a really high level. Like,
no, that's what I said. I didn't have a high level, which is why I was on the couch.
Oh, I see. Well, you built it up pretty quickly, but
I did. Over a period of probably 5 years.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, I think from the time I probably did that ride until I did my first Ironman was about a 5-year window, which is really short, right? For doing Ironman, like for racing Ironman is short, and I would never recommend that that's the strategy somebody would take, but I just had a lot of things line up in my favor. Some natural ability. I had the time to do the training. I was single guy at that point in life, and I was living out in Calgary, and just a fabulous community, an outdoor community, host of Winter Olympics. So it's an athletic community. So I had lots of support and just miles and miles of beautiful roads to ride. So all that helped as well.
Yeah. Do you still compete in endurance events?
I will. So I don't know how to answer that. So not very often. So part of the health journey was really tied with when I retired from doing Ironman races, when it was because I couldn't solve a gut issue. So I would go out and do a simulation, swim a couple of miles, ride 100 miles, and then at about 10K into the run, I'd get some real gut issues. And at that time, we didn't understand the gut anywhere near as well as we do today. And I couldn't find anybody to offer me any kind of informed advice about it. I thought, I've done Ironmans. I don't need to do Ironmans. That doesn't define me. I've got other things I want to do in life. So I just parked at night and I could do half Ironmans. I always liked half Ironman because I could race them. Ironman is more survival, but half irons I could race. So I've done a couple of half irons just in the last couple of years, and partly just because, I thought there was living nearby one. I thought, well, that's pretty convenient. I used to pack everything up and take it on the plane, and that was just, a big deal. I thought, well, this one's, I can drive to it, and I can, the day before go do the race and let's do it. And so I did one 2 years ago, and it was like on relatively little training from an Ironman standpoint. When I say relatively little, right? And actually did pretty well, and even in the sprinted down the last probably 500 meters or so, and I'm thinking, okay, you were clearly pacing yourself a little too conservatively. It'd been so long since I'd raced at that distance, I was just being conservative. So I trained and decided to do another one, see if I could race it. And it, as luck turned out, as it happens in endurance sport, sometimes other things happen. I ended up having something happen in my gut, unrelated. I think I had, whether it was a virus or something, that I knew 5 minutes into the swim, something wasn't right. And I did the swim and I did the bike. And the bike, again, I was able to manage it, but I didn't even bother to try to run. It was clearly not going to happen that day.
So how old were you when you did your first one? I just want to get clear on this.
I think I was 47.
Okay. Wow. That's incredible. And how old are you now, Scott?
65.
65. And you're still doing half Ironman. And you started when you were 47. I think that is the most amazing thing about that story is people of a certain age, they get to a certain age and they don't think now's when I could start to do something like that. They assume that if I didn't do that when I was younger, it's too late.
Yeah. And I think I talk about that in the book too, is that we underestimate our capacity universally. I underestimate my own on things. But when I go do it, I usually discover, that actually was possible. You can't do everything, right? That's not the point of trying to max out on everything. But in terms of generally physically, we're all capable of a lot more than we are. And I use the cardiovascular system as a great example of it has so much capacity the way it's designed, right? It's almost because we abuse it to just such an extent that we run into the heart disease issues that we do. But if you take the basic system and you think that we don't even think about doing intervention until we have at least 70% blockage.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? That tells you something about the original design of the system, of how over-designed it is. It kind of says, how can we have so many heart issues that we do, given the system is so ridiculously over-designed? And that's kind of applies to, I think, lots of things in the human body that we just don't understand.
Yeah, so I was just listening, while you were talking, and I think we've had guests on here that talk about the why and how your why can change. So maybe when you started this journey, you didn't realize that, at 47, your why changed from now. You're talking about how much you enjoyed riding the bike. You really didn't have any kind of experience in a athletic point of view, but it shifted, right? I can't remember. Someone mentioned that in another cast that we had, but I was just wondering, it really does change. You at 47, your why went from whatever it was prior to that, and then you became an Ironman, which is one of the coolest things about this.
Yeah. When I told you when I went out for that first ride, I didn't even know what Ironman was. I'd never. If you'd asked me, I said, I guess it's some weightlifting thing.
Yeah.
Right? The super strong guys.
Right.
That would have been my guess at it. So it's not I had this long thing. But if I look at, that's why I can't say I avoid telling people all the things, career things I've done in my life, because I've been one to say yes, and I became the utility guy. And that's partly why I got offered so many things was, you could throw me at something, and usually by noon that day, I'd got the ground level stuff figured out and had a plan around, okay, here's what we're going to do. And by, a year into it, we kind of sorted it out and then finalize it. And then I'm off to the next thing. And there's, stuff just would come at me all the time. But yeah, it's and if I told you that I would be working around health and aging at this point in my life, I would say, you're nuts, right? What are you smoking, man? Right. So that my why kind of is centered around this now, and that I feel more excited about my career now than I ever have at any point in my life. I've owned businesses. I've worked for some great people. So you don't know, right? You really don't know. And if I think the worst thing that we can do is just get stuck in a rut. I wrote about this on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago about the difference between a rut and a groove. Right? So visually they look the same, right? But the rut you're stuck in, the groove is you found your groove. So it's like kind of say, are you in a rut or are you in a groove?
Like that.
Right? And they sure feel a whole lot different.
Yeah. But externally, they might look the same.
Right.
Just this little dividend.
And the way the world, you kind of mentioned earlier on, the way the external world sees us, they may not see the difference. Like I would tell you when I left corporate, like people like, what? You got I was at the top floor of the DuPont building, headquarters. And you're like, not happy? What is wrong with you, man? You kind of got the pick job of all of them. You don't have responsibilities. You get to, no, it's just not me. It's nothing wrong with someone else doing the job. It just isn't me, right? So I was in a rut. I needed to find a groove. So I'm in my groove now. I found my groove, man.
That's awesome. Is that something that you knew? Like, did you have to work up to that? Like, I'm leaving, or was it like you've always hey, once I know it's not for me, it's easy for me to make that decision to just move to the next thing? Or was it something that you had to build up to over your life?
I think again by shifting jobs and I moved I think 8 times over a period of 12 years. That was the most moves I made, and I was kind of through that phase. I think the more you do it, the more you realize how to do it. So it's not I'll kind of tell a short story here. It's one of my last conversations with my dad was, and we were quite close, and he was a great mentor for me. And I said, Dad, you've never told me the story about when you left your job and started your business, because I worked for his business. It was how I went to work at 12, and it was just a great experience for me. Because I thought, and when I, looking back on it, was at that time he had his oldest son getting ready to go off to college. 5 kids at home. Wife worked at home. She had her hands full taking care of us. And he was a plant superintendent, pretty responsible job, and he quit. I said, so tell me about that. I've never heard that. And I'd never heard the story. He said he was just on my way home, and he said I was just so upset. He said I had to pull off the road, and he said that was when I decided. So I think we all there's a certain moment where we make the decision, but in reality, of course, we've been doing some planning, and I think that's really important because he knew that he had something else he could do. So he was torn between, do I stay with the sure thing? But it's killing me, right? It wasn't, he never started a business because he could make more money. That was never the driver. I kind of say with doctors, I don't know any doctor who's went into medicine so that they could make more money than doing any number of things, right? They know that should be part of it, but they're putting in a whole lot of time to get to that point, and that's not the motivation to go into medicine. So what I had developed this skill for, I'd seen it in my father make a really, really tough decision that worked out really well. So I knew it could be. And I'd got better about understanding, is this a problem that I can fix? Or is it one I can't, right? Change the things you can, right? Focus on those things. And often in life, you just find yourself in a situation that you can't change enough things. And it's you who has to make the change. And either it could be just an attitude change, or it could be, no, you need to make a physical change. The physical change or the environment change would be like if you're trying to quit smoking and all your friends are smokers, you're probably going to have to choose between smoking and your friends.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah.
you're going to give some thought to that. Doesn't mean you're never going to quit, but it probably isn't. You're not going to quit the first time you think about it. You're going to work on it for a while. You get a plan. So every time, and I've got better at when I'm leaving this one, I've already got the other one well laid out, and it's just now I've got to devote all my time to it. So you kind of get to that balance point of it's you have to be responsible with your money. There's usually people counting us to be responsible, and and it's no fun to look back on life and say I was really irresponsible with my money all through life, because that's not going to play out very well for us a lot of times in later years.
Scott, I wanted to circle back. So you mentioned that young 30-year-old who asked you about dementia, and you have a fascinating chapter on dementia in the book, and aging and dementia. And one of the things you talk about is technology. And technology in a way that I hadn't thought about it. Technology, how it may actually be one of the risk factors in causing dementia. Both a tool for helping us as an aging population. You talk a lot about data, but then you also talk about the kind of dark side and downside of technology, which I'd love for you to expand on.
Yeah. So if we think, so technology is huge, right? I've been around technology my whole life, so none of this is bashing technology. But again, it kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier around growing up with technology, and we're still in our youth around technology. And so in terms of, if we think about what are the primary risk factors associated with dementia, and I think what I find myself telling people, one of the first parts of a conversation is the importance of vascular health. It's the common thread amongst all forms of dementia. If you don't have good cardiovascular health, you are at risk for all forms of dementia. And we think about dementia, again, we don't have to get too worried about which type of dementia it is, because part of that is just which part of the brain's affected. It's not like cancer where we have totally different cancer cells that have their own nature. They require their own type of drug to treat that one. A lot of dementia is just what part of the brain's affected. So if we think about stimulating the brain, the one thing that a lot of technology does is dulls our brain, right? So if we sit back and watch TV, right, that's a very one-sided experience. It's not engaging our brain. We're just taking in entertainment. It's not really causing us to think. We may remember a joke or something that was in there. So I think everyone knows, sitting watching TV all day is not stimulating the brain. It's not going to promote long-term cognitive health. Things like our phones, right, would be the common thing around. We all see it when we see people walking, literally looking at their phones while they're walking. And while they're taking in information and they're moving, what they're missing out is the dynamic world that's going around them, and taking that information in, because there are many things about life that people just seem to be shielded from, because they're so immersed in the technology of the 5-second dopamine hit that check my email, check this, or check TikTok or whatever. I got to show you this great video. And so we start to get to lose touch with what type of stimuli really feed the brain. Oh, again, it goes back to that over long periods of time, over the span of a lifetime, right? Not what makes you happy right now, what actually feeds your brain. And when I talk about feeding the brain, one of the signals is it feeds your curiosity, right? I talk about humility as being a trait amongst people who age really well. And when I say that, what I'm really talking about is they remain curious. They're humble around their understanding, because they're always curious to know more. And so people who are curious are not typically arrogant, right? right? So that's kind of when I say humility is what I'm talking about. They are like, I know a lot of scientists who are really brilliant and a lot of doctors really brilliant, but they're also really curious and they're really humble, and they realize all the things they don't know. And well, we kind of make these assumptions until we know more, you know, and somebody's working on that, I hope. And when they do, I hope I find out about it. And so that's the one side of technology that I think we understand. And I think I love to play Sudoku. Sudoku isn't going to do much for my brain, right? I enjoy it. What I like about playing Sudoku, it's a timeout from it. It's like a mindfulness exercise. It focuses me on one thing for about 7.5 minutes, sometimes 5.5, sometimes 12, depending on how well I did with it. But so is that kind of where you're thinking of, Rock, in terms of when you asked about the technology piece?
Yeah. It dims the mind is an interesting way to say it. And I do think a lot about, a lot of what we do on technology as a society is very mindless. And I also just appreciated the idea of curiosity being associated with healthy aging. You don't really, when you read like about longevity and things like that, people aren't talking about that, but that is a trait, this humility and curiosity that I think speaks to how your worldview and how you navigate the world and how you interact with people and your relationships. And so it has probably like a lot of bearing on that.
Yeah, the whole, like we think about aging, like, so one of the worst things we do for aging is this monoculture. So I'll kind of go back to the housing example of the 55 plus community is it's a version of the subdivision for people 55 plus, except that, well, it's not going to be where kind of close to anything typically. And we'd like people to all be kind of in the same age demographic and preferably in the same race and the same economic class, because we're going to set a threshold for entry. And so you get this monoculture of people who look and act the same. And almost without exception, you find that after a period of about 24 months, there's a certain boredom sets in, because it's a little bit tiring if all I ever do is have conversations with people who look like me, who act like me, who have basically the same experiences. You work for that company, I work for this company. But at the end of the day, really, we kind of did the same thing, I guess, versus if you look at the curious communities will be ones where, there's kids doing odd things that are atypical relative to what I do in my day, for example. There's things from, other cultural learnings, like you talked about in terms of for a multi-generational home. Like, so that to me is, I haven't experienced that yet, but I can't help to be curious about what that life experience would be like growing up in that and then aging in that experience, right? So, and then in the in-between period where you've got kids at home, the sandwich, you got kids at home and your parents are there. I know I've helped many families, modify or design their homes in a way that they could bring their parents in to stay with them. And then with some plan around what are you going to do with that space after your parents are gone? Like, so kind of, it's this really continuous view of the world is always going to change, and we need to be thinking beyond this current challenge that we have. So, yeah, I think curiosity is, if there's one thing people could do, like what really piques your curiosity, and how can you find some time and space in your day to make room for that,
and approach everything with that. I hear that through line, like you're talking about different types of movement, and like people should really approach it with like, what's a way I could move my body that might feel good for me, that might be enjoyable, as you talk about.
Yeah. It's on that one. So we talk about with aging. One of the things that's important is to maintain muscle mass. Right. I'm not actually a big fan of going to the gym and getting the dumbbells out and seeing how many, or the bar and seeing how many curls you can do in it, and how many reps with whatever weight. Those are all fine things to do. I'm not saying there's a problem with them. The problem is those don't relate to physical daily activities. They don't do much around balance, timing, sense of where you are in the world. activities that keep you, what I think about, it's not a medical term, but I think about it in terms of dynamic muscle. So we kind of between slow twitch and fast twitch muscle, but we could think about as what are the dynamic muscles that you're using, which means you're incorporating your major muscles, but also your stabilizers. And so you're always kind of, going to the edge of balance where you get used to it. And we think about those are the sort of things that will pay big dividends in later years, which is part of why pickleball is such a huge hit. It's I would say within the longevity world, we would probably view pickleball as the number one sport for longevity.
Because it's so functional. It's so functional, like all the movements.
But also cognitive, right? Because you're moving in space, you've got a partner there, you got two people on the other side of the net that are moving. So you're moving, your partner, the other two people, the ball's moving, everything else is fixed. Maybe there's some wind going on too. So that's the other part of you want to have a high cognitive load while you're having functional physical load. So the previous one I would have told you would have been dance, but almost nobody dances anymore. But it's the same idea. You look at dancers and look at the longevity of dancers, striking, right? Not as intensive from a cardiovascular standpoint as you would think, but they are using a much broader range of muscles, and their brain is all the time anticipating the next move and what move is are the people around me on the dance floor making, because I've got to have that in my mind as well.
So you heard it here first. Pickleball is the new dance of the 21st century. The new generation of dance is pickleball, actually.
There's your show title.
Bro, do you play pickleball? Have you played pickleball, Po?
No, I've heard about it.
You've heard about it. Yeah. I haven't played
I've actually
yet.
never done it before. I've heard about it by one of my cousins. She's really big into. She keeps telling me, but I've never actually got a chance to actually go and
a lot of people are getting really into it. I have patients of mine who are really into it. But I'm loving that you're describing the longevity benefits of it. So it's so accessible for people to do something like that. It's also social and communal, right. And there's that's really cool.
Yeah, and it's affordable, right? It's accessible from that standpoint, which a lot of sports, like if you compared it to tennis, right? The cost of playing pickleball versus tennis and the amount of social interaction because of the way I was out for dinner with 12 of us last night, and we were the kids there because I like hanging out with all ages. And we arranged it. We weren't guests. My wife actually arranged it. And so I was learning more about their pickleball. And they say, like every game we move around. It's not like tennis where you play like 3 sets and you only ever encounter 3 other people. No, they said it's just every game we move, we all turn around. And so it's way more social, and you're in a much smaller space in terms of, density of people per square foot. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons why it's a good sport. They were talking about other racket sports I'd never even heard of. So that's not the only one in town, and maybe there'll be the next, pickleball 2.0 will be something different again.
Scott, you write a lot about the silver tsunami. This tsunami of like our population getting older, and how do we think about this? I mean, on one end, I'm like, are we just destined? Like, if you look at how, as a society, we take care of our health and the trends, like how can our society, can communities, can policymakers prepare for this demographic shift? Maybe you can describe it a little bit, and also how we can kind of better brace for it.
It's I think one is I'm not big on playing the fear card, but I think to suggest there's one tsunami coming, that's what I was trying to quickly see if I could flip to find. I think I list about 10 out in the book of all factors, each one on their own is very significant in terms of shifts over time. So there's the bubble or the inversion that's happened since the boomers, who had they were the product of large families. So there were lots of boomers to care for parents. That's now flipped because boomers didn't have very many kids, and that has stayed continuous really since the early 60s when it started to decline. And so now there's this huge, and everyone's hearing about, right, is the staff shortages across the board, and everyone thinks, wants to associate with the pandemic. We've known there were going to be staff shortages coming for a long time. People are just starting to, everyone wants to put a label on it that, and because people don't want to work and, all the usual stuff. That's part of it. To just understand that that's the reality. It's not going anywhere. And so unless you happen to be, one of the ones who had 4 kids and then, 3 of them live really close to you, then you could ignore that because you're probably in good shape. But you're the exception, not the rule. That used to be the rule, right? So they've flipped around. And so how are you gonna solve that? In terms of economics around what's changed, I think everyone is hearing about the price of so many things have gone up. So I'll tell you, before the pandemic, already the cost of health care and certain care for the aging and housing for the aging in facilities was going up at about 50% higher than the rate of inflation pre-pandemic. Since the pandemic, all of the gaps were raised up and they're having to pay significantly more for staffing. So I don't know what it is now, but I can tell you it took a significant jump and it's not going to go down. So in terms of this notion of aging in place, well, we're going to do it as long as we can, as though there's going to be an option of some place to go that's magically going to drop out of the sky. You're not going to be able to. Most of us who think we can afford it probably haven't done the numbers, because we would want to do a really good job at understanding those numbers before we get too complacent about it. And I see that happens a lot, unfortunately, because we just don't want to look at the aging plan in that level of detail. So that kind of goes back to what would be the things we would do. So I would say the main two always will go back to health and housing. So if we're thinking about a housing situation, that either how are we going to manage that, and should we be looking at, am I going to go live with one of my kids? And if that's going to work out for everybody, awesome, right? Maybe that's never going to work. And so what is the plan, right? You've got to get something going before the money's all spent. And I think that's if we acquire any wisdom in our, at what age we're at, we should know you got to act long before the money's all spent, because the options just go away. I don't hold a lot of hope for policy change. There are those who are working on it, but we've known this was coming for decades. I told you I was talking about when in my 20s. Right. And so it's not like that some big wisdom's coming now to tell us, oh, we're going to have to do something about it. We've known it was coming, and so it's not politically popular to talk about aging and throwing money at old people, because they're not contributing anyway to society. They're just a burden on society. It's kind of the stereotype that you hear. And so really, I think it's on everybody to really spend some time to say, how do I want this life to be a great life across my lifespan? Not just today, but across my lifespan. And so that's if I go back to say, I think the ideal for a lot of people is how do you, I talk in the book a lot about connection, right? About aging is essentially a loss of signal, loss of connection. Focus on things that improve connection, social connection. Part of everything we talk about health is in terms of signaling connections with the signaling molecules in our bodies, but really drive towards more connection versus isolation, because isolation will be the default. It's just inevitable with aging, because that's like the wall is kind of closing in on us. Isolation is the default, because there'll be days that we feel less inclined to go outside. Not more. We're not going to get more courageous and more adventuresome when we get older. Typically, maybe we will, but that's not the norm unless we start to do that today. So those would be the things that I really kind of really encourage people to set yourself up for success, just like you would for your kids going off to college, right? Or when you were going off to college, think about it in that way, to say, I'm about to go to college, I'm going to start my career. This is going to be the next phase of life. This is pretty exciting. So what would make it exciting for you? Staying and just kind of hunkering down and hoping that, you don't get hit by one of the missiles
Right.
coming in. Like, it's not really much of a plan, because that's really not the way life works. And if you prepare yourself, you're going to be more resilient, and you're going to be less vulnerable, and you're going to be with people who are going to help you through all sorts of things. And you're going to find your why by helping them, because there's times they're going to need you, right? It's not simply a dependence. It's a codependence on each other, which ultimately is, we are pack animals. This notion, that's kind of goes back to the subdivision thing is really not in our nature. We are pack animals, and we're not supposed to get along all the time. It's okay. It'd be great if we did, but that's part of learning our social behavior. Kind of going back to the technology pieces, we're getting less and less skilled at our social behaviors around operating together as a pack. So start practicing and then just keep fostering that. I think is really helpful endeavor for us too.
I don't know how we're doing on time, but I had like one more question. Like you were just talking about how, for us that have parents that are aging, obviously us, having this podcast has really made me more aware of like what I should be thinking towards as far as my own, aging. But what kind of advice could you give, in your experience, could you give people out there, myself, maybe Rock too, of like the conversation with our own parents? And like, how do we initiate that? Like, you know what I mean? Because obviously they're still, feeling like, oh, I can do that. But, I talk to my wife a lot about like, man, we got to start developing a plan for when your parents get older, physically, like what do we need to do right now? What kind of advice could you give those who just want to sort of initiate this process with discussing this with their parents?
Yeah, that's a great question, Poe, and it's one that comes up in conversation a lot. So the norm is that one of the two parties doesn't want to have the conversation. Right?
Yeah.
And you never know which, but it's the norm that like the parents want to be, they want, because they've seen what's happened. They don't want to do that to their kids, right? Or they went through it and they inherited all the mess from their parents. I am not ever going to do this to my kids. And so it's kind of like talking about the birds and the bees. Like, at what age are you going to have the conversation? It's the birds and the bees conversation with your parents. And so ultimately, it doesn't matter who starts the conversation. That's really, and don't expect it to be an easy conversation like the birds and the bees conversation wasn't an easy conversation. You didn't answer all the questions, because it happened over a period of time that they came back. What about just, the exceptions and all the things that kind of the nuances that I think are fun and amusing. But I think it's really, if it's driven from a place of, it's got to be non-threatening to the parents, because as you get older, the world becomes more threatening to them. Again, because the world wants to take everything away from us, is what they feel, right? They want to take our keys away from us. They want to take away our rights to just go out and take our time crossing the road without people honking at us because we're going too slow. And they don't market to us anymore. They forget about us. So we're kind of like, we're just a pain in the butt to everybody, is kind of what they feel like. And so it's got to be a conversation that's about coming from a place of love, that like, I want to be part of that experience. Like, I want to be involved in it the same way like you may want to be involved in the birth or raising of a grandchild. It kind of goes both ways, like to say, how can I help? But don't tell me I can't. Like, just don't accept that I'm not allowed to be part of it because you're my parents, right? So I think, I get a little choked up just talking about it, because these are tough conversations, but they move mountains. They really move mountains, and they will cause healing in places that you would never imagine, right? And that's they are really, really powerful. They are, again, look to other cultures who would have these conversations routinely. Don't ask your I'll say your old white guy neighbor, or they don't know jack about this stuff, right? Ask people who live this stuff all the time, and they will guide you through it. They are, ask people who know, not people who think they know.
Yeah. I used to work for many years in the hospital, Scott, and we would have these conversations, I would say, unfortunately, at the end of life, where all these things that they wanted to be able to die at home. They wanted, they had never expressed it, or there was never, and it wasn't the fault of anyone. I think this is not a norm in our society. I don't think it's become a norm to have these conversations. Actually, I think it's become a norm to not have these conversations to some degree. And that's really doing, like, as you're saying, a disservice to the experience of everyone as they age. It could be an opportunity to really explore what that life might unfold to be, or it could be this reactive scenario where you're just constantly trying to, tread water.
Yeah, I think so maybe this is kind of a good place to bring it to, because there are a lot of questions that we have because we're so short-sighted in our thinking and our decision making. One of the exercises I try to take people through is to find a way to connect with the long game. What's your long game? And we can talk about that to say, what would you like the last year of your life to look like? My last year of my life, I'm quite sure I'm not going to be worried about how fast I can cycle or how fast I can run, or those aren't going to be metrics that are going to be meaningful to me, right? I'm pretty sure I don't want to be in the hallway of the, whatever general hospital to pass. That's clearly not in my line of sight. If I think I want to be at home and ultimately die at home, then, and that's really important to me, then what am I going to do to make that a possibility? So this is the engineer in me, right? To say, this isn't rocket science. It's reverse engineer your life and say, what do you truly value? And it's not going to be your car. It's not going to be how big your house is, or, whether you got the latest iPhone. It's going to be really get down to those values. And that's why I say, like, the powerful conversations like that can bring families together, or reconnect with friends, or those sort of moments are really opportunities to say, what do I want to leave behind, right? And what you're going to leave behind is memories. Again, nobody cares about your stuff. You might think it's important, but nobody wants your stuff, right? But what they want are great memories. And so how are you going to create those great memories? And that's probably going to be really important to you, because you say, if there's one thing I'd like to leave you and you and you, with some great memories. And so if that's really, really what matters, what am I going to start doing about it today? Right? Because it's today that makes that a possibility. And I want to create those memories along the journey between today and then. And so it's a game changer when people make that, when the switch flips and they say, yeah, it doesn't mean I'm thinking about, last year of life and that becomes now my priority. You just naturally start to align your actions with your values. And so it's not a question of, I'm a vegan and so that's gonna matter. Hopefully nobody cares. They will care if eating well got you to that point and allowed you to have some important memories. That's what they're going to remember. So what are the choices you make around lifestyle that will allow you to support your true values? And that's part of, I think, the inner conversation and the conversation that have to happen with others and with family, like the people who care, right? Why do you care? Why do you care what happens to me when I get old, to a son or daughter? Like, I didn't think, like, I always kind of felt like I was in the way. Like, you got your job, you got your kids. Like, I didn't want to get in the way, right? Because that happens because, we all get busy doing stuff and we forget, they forget. Go ahead, revisit the conversation. Not as like, why don't you ever call me anymore?
Yeah, right.
Right? It's the same conversation. Sure. How you enter it is very different.
Yeah. You're an important part of my world, my life. And I've been thinking a lot about, the future. And I want to make sure, that's how you might approach it with love, as you say. And then, what unfolds. That's beautiful. Thank you, Scott. We ask one final question to all our guests, which is if you were coming, well, you are at the Health Feast. So I always say this now, Poe, and I'm like, asking if you're coming to our proverbial Health Feast. We're having all our guests who are coming, and they're all bringing their lifestyle or their life philosophy or some sort of lifestyle tip. What might Scott Fulton be bringing to our Health Feast?
I think I'll go back and kind of suggest that bring curiosity. Just bringing curiosity to the table is again, I think it's a powerful tool to cut through. Like, you can talk about politics even if it's coming from a place of curiosity, right? And so, like, I want to learn, why do you do different things differently than I do? Why don't we all agree on the right amount of protein we should be eating? Right?
Thank you.
Like, instead of debating about it, let's be curious about it and be. It's just, to me, it breaks down lots and lots of walls and allows a more intellectual conversation, and then hopefully, we both win, and we both feel like we've won by coming to the feast and sharing in a nice dish of curiosity.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah. Thank you, Scott. I really appreciate it, man. You really kind of opened up my curiosity about what my game plan is, how I perceive or how I foresee my life, and then also been really, like, I want to call my parents right now and start talking about this, because it's like, man, it's a real thing, and it's something that, you don't really think about, I mean, we're always busy, on the wheel, like trying to, you're on the grind, and then, sometimes it's okay to just take a pause and be like, well, let's sort of reflect on what life looks like in the next 50 years. You know what I mean? But I really appreciate the time you've given us here today. Thank you.
I love the conversation with you guys. I'd do this every day if I could.
Yeah.
Love it, Scott. Scott, I love it. I love the conversation too. I really appreciate that you have devoted your life's work to helping people live in place, live, die, and age with dignity, and really embrace, as we started this conversation, embrace aging as a celebrated part of life. That's incredible. Yeah, it's really incredible. So, okay, we do our requisite fist bump to the camera. Everyone, please. Scott, there you go. Boom. All right, we will see you all back here next time at the Health Feast. Live well and rock on. Take care, everyone.